And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another series in my ongoing read through an overview of the DC Rebirth comics universe. Over the last few weeks I've covered all these various different ancillary parts of the DC Rebirth universe. As you can see on the screen here, I've split it into 7 different sections, and the first thing we covered was Young Animal, which was 180 issues. Then we covered the Deceasediverse, as I like to call it, which was a mere 40 issues. We then moved on to Black Label, which was quite complicated, 92 issues. We then covered all the out of continuity comics, which I know surprised quite a few of you in terms of the things I included there and the things I didn't, and that's 157 issues. Then we covered the Wildstorm universe, a mere 36 issues, but a surprisingly long video. And finally, today, before we dive into the main core Rebirth bit, the substantive part of it, we're now just going to slice off the licensed worlds section, which is 208 issues. So what do I mean by the licensed world section? Well, during the DC Rebirth era, there were a range of series totaling, as I say, 208 single issues that were published in joint publication ventures with other comic publishers. Now, whilst these are definitively not part of the DC Rebirth universe, they are in many cases interesting reads, and even of a high quality. As such, given that they comprise part of this era in terms of the cadence or the timing in which they were released, I'm going to provide you the following overview. Now, this is going to be split over 2 different videos, much like the out of continuity one, just because there's so much to cover. In this video, I'm actually going to cover 6 of the publishers, and then in the second video, I'm going to cover just 1 of them. So the 6 I'm going to cover this time around are the Archie comics, Boom comics, Dark Horse comics, DC Looney Tunes, Dynamite comics, and IDW comics. The ones I'm going to cover next time around are the Hanna-Barbera comics, because that's kind of its own thing and there's loads of them. And then once we've covered all that, we will have covered all the licensed tie-in or intercompany crossovers that were published during the DC Rebirth era. And then that will leave us, as the next stage after this, diving into DC Rebirth and the core continuity of DC Rebirth comics, which I know is what everyone's been most excited about, and that's really what they want, much more than these other ancillary things. But as I said, I'm not looking to make a perfect reading order. I just wanted to get it done. And for me, psychologically, the best way to do it was to be slicing off the extraneous stuff before I dived into it in any more detail. So with that preamble out of the way, let's look straight into licensed worlds. Let's start off in no particular order with what I like to call the Archieverse. So the Archieverse is basically a crossover between DC and Archie comics. In particular, we're looking at Harley and Ivy meet Betty and Veronica. Now, this was published from 2017 to 2018. And Betty and Veronica was a comic published originally by Archie Comics, focusing on best frenemies Betty Cooper and Veronica Lodge. I knew nothing about this. I'm not familiar with this at all. I'd never really read Archie Comics. From what I gather, this was originally first published in March 1950 and ran for 347 issues up until April 1987. That was the first volume with a big V, or the first series of it. The second volume with the big V ran from 1987, so the same year the first volume ended, to 2015, and that was 278 issues. Fair enough. Almost immediately after that, a new series started, which took place in a rebooted New Riverdale. New Riverdale is kind of like where the Archie Comics universe is set. And that debuted in September 2016. Yes, that's the same month of the New 52 launch, actually. And that was written and drawn by Adam Hughes. So that's what Archie Comics as a whole is. That's what Betty and Veronica sort of is all about. And then what happened in 2017, there was a crossover with DC, which is a 6-issue miniseries where the DC pair, so Harley Quinn and Pamela Eiley, or Poison Ivy, swap bodies with Betty and Veronica. It's like a Freaky Friday sort of thing. So it's written by Mark Andreyko and Paul Dini with art from Laura Braga. 6 issues, self-contained. It just exists. It is not tied into anything else. Standalone. All of these are all standalone. Everything in the licensed world section. And there we have it. Moving on to the next publisher, we've got Boom Comics. So Boom is a reasonably well-known publisher as well. More so than Archie, at least to me. I've got a fair few Boom comics. So the first one that I want to look at is Justice League Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. So this is a Justice League Power Rangers crossover from 2017. In case you somehow don't know, Power Rangers, they're a group of teenagers from a fictional city called Angel Grove, which is in California, I think. Well, I don't know quite how that works, but it is. And they've been chosen by an intergalactic kind of alien god thing called Zordon, who transforms them into the Power Rangers, which is a group of martial arts warriors that fight evil monsters sent from space by some kind of wicked witch called Rita something. I've never watched Power Rangers. I'm not really into it. It's kind of like they dress up in these weird motorbike outfits, and they each have unique colours, each to their own, and then they do martial arts, but then they also pilot gigantic mecha robots like Pacific Rim. I never really got into Power Rangers. I don't know what it is. What I will say is that I read this series knowing nothing about Power Rangers, but was totally able to follow it along. It's written by Tom Taylor, the same guy who wrote the Deceased universe. It's got art from Stephen Byrne, which is completely adequate for what it is. And this 6-issue series is actually quite fun. So it's fun enough as it is. If you're a big fan of Power Rangers, you may well want to hunt it down anyway. And if you're a fan of Tom Taylor's writing, which I am, I would definitely recommend it because I did enjoy it. Next up, the second thing that's a crossover between DC and Boom Comics is Lumberjanes Gotham Academy, 2016 to 17. Now, Lumberjanes is a comic book series created by Shannon Waters, Grace Ellis, Gus Allen, and N.D. Stevenson. The story itself follows a group of girls spending summer at a scout camp and the various strange creatures and supernatural phenomena they encounter there. It ran for 75 issues for 6 years, from 2014 to 2020. I haven't actually read it. I do have it in my collection to read. I get the impression it's kind of kid-friendly, which makes sense when you consider this crossed over with Gotham Academy, which we also know is kid-friendly. The thing to keep in mind is that Gotham Academy debuted in the New 52, it is part of my New 52 guide, but actually it continues on into the DC Rebirth era with a second series called Gotham Academy Second Semester. Now, I will be covering that at the start of my core Rebirth guide, which is going to start off with a bunch of things I call New 52 epilogues, and Gotham Academy Second Semester is one of those. Now, this Lumberjanes Gotham Academy crossover actually came out at the same time as Second Semester, and it was actually published by Boom Studios, specifically their young adult imprint, which is called Boombox. And it's completely standalone. You don't have to read Second Semester at all. You don't have to read it in any particular order. You can read it before, you can read it after. It's an entirely standalone story. It requires pretty much no pre-existing knowledge of either series before you read it. I mean, I went into it having never read any Lumberjanes and I was fine. It's self-contained and is very kid-friendly. It's written by someone called Clugston Flores with art from Rosemary Valero O'Connell. The final Boom series we have here is Planet of the Apes / Green Lantern from 2017. Now, Planet of the Apes, I'm not going to give an overview. I mean, it's a multimedia franchise about a post-apocalyptic world in which humans and intelligent apes clash for control as the dominant species of the planet. If you don't know what Planet of the Apes is, I cannot help you. That description is probably the best that I can do, and it's probably all you need. This 6-issue miniseries is written by Robbie Thompson and Justin Jordan. It's got art from Barnaby Bergenda, and like I say, no pre-existing Planet of the Apes knowledge is essential before reading this, although a fair bit of Green Lantern knowledge is essential before reading this. You need to know who people like Sinestro are and things like that. That takes us to the Boom tie-ins. Let's move on to the Dark Horse tie-ins. So in the Dark Horse verse, as it were, with the DC Dark Horse tie-ins for this era, the first one I want to look at is Black Hammer Justice League. This is called Hammer of Justice, and it ran from 2019 to 2020. Now, this is a 5-issue series written by Jeff Lemire, drawn by Michael Walsh. And to be honest, this fits much more within the existing Dark Horse published Black Hammer universe than anything to do with DC, really, to be honest. I mean, the Justice League is in it, and they are in it throughout regularly, but it's very much a Black Hammer focus thing. And if you're doing a Black Hammer read through, you absolutely have to read this story. Whereas if you're doing a Justice League read through of DC Rebirth, this is kind of by the side. It's out of continuity. It's a licensed world. You can ignore it. That's why it's in this particular video. So just to give you a quick overview of what Black Hammer is, because I knew nothing about Black Hammer going into this. It's a titular series by Jeff Lemire, in that it's called Black Hammer. And it's now the tentpole for an entire comics little mini universe, all of which is published by Dark Horse. Now, like I say, I knew nothing whatsoever about Black Hammer. I hadn't even looked at the Wikipedia page. I knew nothing about it. And I still went into this. I read it and it made sense. It's a quirky story, but whilst it makes sense in isolation, I feel it would be much more readable if you were doing a big Black Hammer read through, and I am tempted to do that. But actually looking into it, and I've started picking up all the Black Hammer single issues from my local secondhand comic shop, and there's actually a lot of them, and it's an ongoing universe, so it might be a while before I get into reading that. But anyway, here it is. The next Dark Horse tie-in is Wonder Woman Conan. And this came out in 2017-2018. It's a 6-issue series written by Gail Simone, who, as I say, hit and miss writer. When she's hit, she is absolutely on point. When she's missed, she's absolutely abysmal. This series is kind of in the middle as far as I'm concerned. Gail Simone also wrote a lot of Red Sonja. Red Sonja. She wrote a lot of Red Sonja, and as a result has got a lot of experience when it comes to kind of sword and sorcery, barbarian type writing. I haven't read her Red Sonja, that's something I'll do at a separate time. But in this, she wrote this Wonder Woman Conan crossover. It's got art from Aaron Lopresti. And the notable thing about this series, generally, like I say, it's pretty average, is that it's the last Conan comic published before the character moved officially to Marvel. Now, the publication history of Conan comics is a bit complex. Marvel, as in Marvel Comics, began publishing Conan back in 1970. Dark Horse, who we've just been talking about, picked it up from 2003 to 2018. In 2018, it then got reacquired by Marvel, so literally straight after this crossover with Dark Horse. And then Marvel published it in 2022, and then after that 4-year period, Titan Comics took over Conan, so it's currently being published by Titan. So it's all a bit confusing, but long story short, Wonder Woman belongs to DC, and Conan for a while belonged to Dark Horse, and this is the last Conan-related story Dark Horse ever published. All right, moving on to the DC Looney Tunes universe. This is something that a lot of people don't realise. DC owns Looney Tunes, and they've been releasing Looney Tunes comics for absolutely years. They've just, I think, officially cancelled that long-running series in the last year or two, but it's been running for decades. And I'm a big fan of Looney Tunes. They're cool. So DC Meets Looney Tunes is a 2017 to 2018 crossover event that features DC heroes and villains teaming up with the Looney Tunes. Now, a lot of people believe it launched with an oversized one-shot called DC Looney Tunes 100-page Super Spectacular. That came out in 2017, but that Super Spectacular is actually just a reprint of a 4-issue series called Superman and Bugs Bunny, and that miniseries was from the year 2000. Now, as a result, you can ignore trying to track down that oversized Super Spectacular issue. Just go straight into the one-shots or the trades. If you're picking them up as one-shots, each issue also has an all-ages backup story, because the main stories themselves are actually like, they're kind of crazy. They're all really surprisingly gritty and dark rebooted versions of the characters, which I know sounds crazy when you're talking about characters as wacky as things like Porky Pig and Daffy Duck, but genuinely it's really gritty and dark. It's really interesting what they've done here. So with no further ado, let's dive into it. In 2017, 6 issues got released. They got collected in a single trade, which you can see here, which is, I'll just run through them in order. The first one was Batman Elmer Fudd. Now, this issue was the first one I read out of this, and it sets the fucking tone. It's spectacular. It's written by Tom King. I know, hit and miss. I personally find him very hit and miss. And it's drawn by Len Weeks, but it's actually excellent, hard-boiled film noir. It is fantastic. It really, I recommend this as the first one that you read out of all these DC Meet Looney Tunes things, because it's really good and it sets the tone. It has got an all-ages backup story, which is written by Tom King, but drawn by Byron Vaughns. What I will say, and this I guess is as much a badge of quality as it is the obsessive fanboying with Tom King that people have, this one issue is available as a standalone deluxe edition hardcover. I've bought it as a standalone deluxe edition hardcover because it is excellent. Weird, crazy, dark. I like it. Really sets the tone. The next one, and this is still part of the 2017 clutch of 6 issues, was Jonah Hex and Yosemite Sam. The main story is written by Jimmy Palmiotti in one of his rare grim, gritty moods rather than one of his stupid, goofy Harley Quinn moods. It's got art from Mark Texeira. The All Ages backup is written by Bill Matheny with art from David Alvarez, but the main story itself, gritty, dark, interesting. Legion of Superheroes meets Bugs Bunny is written by Sam Humphries. It does feel like Sam didn't get the memo, because this is the only main story in the entire DC meets Looney Tunes crossover that's written for goofy wall-breaking laughs, and as a result, it is not very good. The art's from Tom Grummett, and the All Ages backup is from Juan Ortiz. Next up, we've got Lobo meets Roadrunner. This is written by Bill Morrison with art from Kelly Jones. Great issue. And the All Ages backup is from Bill Morrison. Next up, we have Martian Manhunter and Marvin the Martian, written by Steve Orlando and Frank Barbiere, with art from Aaron Lopresti. The All Ages backup to this issue is from writer Jim Fanning and drawn by John Lotter. And then finally, for the 2017 issues, we have Wonder Woman and Tasmanian Devil. This was written by Tony Bedard with art from Barry Kitson. And the All Ages backup is again by Tony Bedard, but drawn by Ben Caldwell. So those were all collected in a single trade paperback that you can see here. Subsequently, in 2018, a further 4 DC meets Looney Tunes single issues were released. As far as I know, they remain uncollected in trade or any other kind of format. If you know otherwise, please let me know, because I would love to be corrected. But all the research I've done, I can only track these down in singles, despite everything I could do. Of course, I'm somewhat limited in that I'm relying on just a few different physical sources, like my local secondhand shop. But it's pretty good, it's pretty comprehensive, and I couldn't find this in the trade. So with no further ado, the 4 single issues that are just loose orphaned issues from 2018 are Catwoman with Tweety and Sylvester. This was written by Gail Simone with art from Inaki Miranda. All Ages backup comes from Shea Fontana, but drawn by Walter Carson. The next one is Harley Quinn and Gossamer. I did not know this big orange thing was called Gossamer. I didn't know that. No one told me that. There's no way for me to know that. This is written by Amanda Connor and Jimmy Palmiotti, the classic Harley Quinn duo, being goofy and stupid, with art from Pia Brito. Not a great issue, but there we are. The All Ages backup is from Charlie Fisk, but drawn by David Alvarez. If you're a Harley Quinn fan, you'll love it. I hate Harley Quinn, so I didn't. The third issue was Lex Luthor Porky Pig, written by Mark Russell with art from Brad Walker. A consistent theme throughout all the DC Rebirth videos is anything that Mark Russell touches, I absolutely love. So I absolutely loved this. And the All Ages backup was from Jim Fanning, but drawn by John Lotter. And finally, the last one is the Joker Daffy Duck special. This has got exceptional art from Brett Booth, who again, a running theme will be I rave on about how good Brett Booth's art is. And it was written by Scott Lobdell. The All Ages backup is from Joey Cavalieri, but drawn by Luciano Vecchio. So those are those 4 issues there, and that wraps up DC Looney Tunes. Moving on to the next publisher, Dynamite. So Dynamite actually published like 2 back-to-back sequels. We'll start with the first one. So it's Batman the Shadow 2017. This was a 6-issue miniseries published with Dynamite, written by Scott Snyder. Yep, Scott Snyder. So Scott Snyder and Steve Orlando, with art from Riley Rossmo. I know all the Snyder fans are going to go crazy and they're going to pick it up on that basis alone. That's fine, you can do. It's collected in a trade paperback called Batman the Shadow, The Murder Geniuses, which is a weird name, but there we are. And it was followed by a direct sequel called Shadow Batman. So just to pause there, the first one was called Batman the Shadow. The second one was called The Shadow Batman. And the second one ran from 2017 to 2018. Another 6-issue miniseries, again published with Dynamite. It's a direct follow-up to the preceding series. And this one was just written by Steve Orlando by himself, so no Scott Snyder, and with art by Giovanni Timpano. We then get into the very final publisher that I want to talk about, which is IDW and the IDW verse. What I will say is that what we're going to do here is we're going to go down another level, because IDW, I think, is in itself split into 3 different categories. So whilst when we looked at the DC universe, or the DC Rebirth universe, we split it into 7 bullet points. Today we're looking at the 7th bullet point here, Licensed Worlds. Within Licensed Worlds, we're looking at 6 publishers. And now we're on the 6th publisher on this first video that we're looking at, IDW. I'm splitting into a further 3 sections. The first section is Batman the Max Arkham Dreams. This came out from 2018 to 2020. This is a 5-issue miniseries written and drawn by Sam Keith. In terms of the specific issues, it's interesting to see that the first 3 issues were published in 2018, and the subsequent wait for issues 4 was so long that the DC intern essentially gave up and released it as a trade collection of 3 issues. Classic DC intern idiocy. We'll talk a lot more about the DC intern over the coming months, because a lot of the future videos are going to be me correcting and fixing hardcovers that have been incorrectly mapped. But what I will say is that when the final 2 issues came out in 2020, they then released it again as this trade paperback, Arkham Dreams, which contains all 5 issues. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with either the character of the Max or the creator Sam Keith, it's quite fascinating, basically. So the Max was a comic created by Sam Keith in 1993. It was originally published monthly until 1998, and it was published by Image Comics. So it lasted for about 35 issues. These were all plotted and illustrated by Keith. William Messner-Loebs helped script issues 1 to 15, and Alan Moore wrote issue 21. The entire run was eventually collected in trade paperback by DC Comics' Wildstorm imprint. When I do my Wildstorm overview and reading guide, I will touch on the Max, but it's not part of the Wildstorm universe per se. And what I'm going to do with the Wildstorm is similarly split it into like outer continuity and tie-ins and things like that. And the Max is going to be one of those. So that series followed the adventure of the hero, the Max, in 2 worlds. He's in the real world as a homeless guy living in a box. And then he's in this alternative reality in his head called the Outback, where he's like a powerful superhero who protects a woman called the Leopard Queen. In the real world, the Leopard Queen is just his social worker called Julie. But in this kind of weird mental fugue that he lives in the Outback, she's this weird goddess. So whilst the Max is aware of the Outback, Julie is not. And the whole series, it's weird, it's psychedelic, and it has a major cult status. This story, this Batman Max crossover, similarly psychedelic and weird. By the way, in terms of the creator, Sam Keith is a name you may have heard of, because in 1989, he penciled the first 5 issues of The Sandman. Yes, that Sandman. So moving on to the next bullet that I want to cover in the IDW sub-universe, Star Trek. So IDW have the rights to Star Trek, and there's 2 series here I'm going to cover. I am conscious that the first one was technically published in the New 52, but bear with me. So we have Star Trek Green Lantern, The Spectrum War. This started publication in 2015, finished in 2016. 6-issue series written by Mike Johnson and drawn by Angel Hernandez. It's set in the Star Trek universe from the J.J. Abrams movies. So specifically, it requires you to have watched at least the first 2 of those films to really understand what's going on in this. It also does presuppose that readers are familiar with DC Blackest Night, which is an event from 2010, pre-New 52. This entire story, The Spectrum War, is set in an alternative reality where a second Blackest Night occurred and the heroes lose, thereby fleeing to a new dimension where they encounter Starfleet. Like I say, I'm aware this technically came out at the end of the New 52, but I've included it here because it's a direct sequel that came out in 2017 called Star Trek Green Lantern Stranger Worlds. And this is another 6-issue miniseries written by Mike Johnson, drawn by Angel Hernandez, and is set directly 6 months after the series we just talked about. It's a direct sequel, and so I've just included them both here for completeness' sake. I'm going to go back and do some tweaks on my New 52 guide at some point later on this year, and when I do, I will be mentioning things like licensed world tie-ins like Star Trek and things like that. So constant incremental improvements. The final bullet I want to cover is the IDW subsection, which I'm going to call the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles universe. There are 4 things in this. The first one is Batman TMNT. This came out in 2016. It's a 6-issue series written by James Tynion IV with art from Freddie Williams II. It's really good. Really, really good. Available as trades, available as hardcovers. I'd highly recommend it. Then, and this is important to note, another TMNT series came out in 2017, but this is called TMNT Adventures. And Batman TMNT Adventures is another 6-issue miniseries inspired by the 2016 series, but completely disconnected and unrelated. Because what it is, it's a crossover story featuring Batman from the DC animated universe and the Turtles from the 2012 animated Nickelodeon series. Written by Matthew Manning, drawn by John Somariva. So So this is TMNT with Batman, but distinct from the Batman TMNT series. I know that sounds weird. I know that sounds confusing and complicated. It's worth mentioning for that reason alone. So this TMNT Adventures you can view as sort of a standalone to a standalone to a standalone. Getting back on track, after Batman TMNT 2016, after that vague dalliance in 2017 with the animated non-continuity kind of like separate series, we then go back into Batman TMNT in 2018, which is a direct sequel to the first series of 2016. It's called Batman TMNT 2. Came out in 2018, 6 issues, written by James Tynion, art from Freddie Williams. Again, really, really, really good. And that was followed by the third in the trilogy, which is Batman TMNT 3. Came out in 2019, again, written by Tynion, again, art from Williams. This was okay, but not great. The first 2 are great, but TMNT 3, not so much. And again, do not forget, TMNT Adventures, whilst it came out between 1 and 2, isn't part of this trilogy of Batman TMNT by James Tynion, is its own thing. But it was published by IDW as well. Okay, there we have it. That is about 100 odd issues, licensed crossover issues between DC and other publishers, all during the DC Rebirth era. In case you were wondering where those fit in case you hadn't heard of some of those, that's where they are. Those are my recommendations. And that's the end of this video. In the next video in this series, which is the final one for the licensed world bit, we're just going to be talking about Hanna-Barbera, of which there is a lot of Hanna-Barbera comics. So we're going to be running through that, and that will be the end of the licensed world. And then after that, the next thing in the DC Rebirth videos that I'll be doing will be diving into core continuity, setting out the sort of the overview of the different events, the different maps, and the different bits and pieces. So I hope you're all looking forward to it. I hope this video was useful. Let me know what you think of the licensed world stuff. Let me know if you got any opinions, of if I missed anything out, or if I wasn't sure what was collected in what sequence. Please feel free to correct me, add more information, and just support the community by commenting. As always, like, subscribe, support the channel, and I will catch you all on the next one. Stay classy.
All right, thanks for watching, everybody. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, please follow me on Twitter at @IamThomasJudge, where I will post a daily review of whatever comics I've been reading. You can get an idea of what I'm up to on the channel. And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon.com and checking out my prose novel about superheroes. It's a completely original piece of work. The first episode in it is called Arrivals, and the series as a whole is called No Gods or Kings. You can find an excerpt of that on my website, nogodsorkings.com. Until next time, everybody, stay classy.